Okay, thank you both. Grant, question 14 will go to you. Student fees continue to soar as a new student will pay around $1,400 in general fees next year, and student debt continues to rise. With the creation of the General Fee Committee and the publication of the general fee this year, is more being done to give students a voice to help address these concerns? And do you have any plans for a general fee committee or in regards to instituting any additional fees?
So I think a good first step that student government's been trying to do for the past, all of my 3 years at least, is to just have the general fee breakdown where for the students. That was a really good first step that we've been working very hard on. In terms of creating a general fees committee, that's not necessarily something that we have on the books. Say that we are going to prioritize the general fees, I think is not accurate. I think that when it comes to the general fees, and you can speak on this if you want to, one of the things that we want to talk about, the next step, so once we know what the fees are, next step is to really understand where, how the money is being spent. And I think because if they're raising our fees, it's for understandable reasons. Let's say engineering fees go up by like $30, but they are improving the computer labs in engineering. Well, that makes sense. They need that $30, and it might be very essentially needed. But I think understanding how that money is being spent is the next step for when it comes to general fees. And do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I guess going off of that, I don't think a committee is necessarily sorry, I don't mean to be redundant. It's not necessary in order for student government to act on general fees. I think that once there is the understanding that student government as a whole can be advocating one way or the other, and targeting specific parts of the fees that we see as needing to be changed. So that's something that the Senate can work on, and particularly our campus culture committee can be tackling, certainly. But currently, when you're looking at the amount of manpower and the amount of projects the student government's working on, I don't know that we actually have the manpower to be resorting to an entire committee, especially with a lot of the other things that we've been trying to focus on and that we're hoping to focus on next year.
Okay, Anna, thank you. So the next sort of 4 questions are going to be directed to either of you. We had a lot of concern about campus safety, specifically how campus safety affects Toledo's reputation. As we all know, Toledo itself may be seen in a negative light based upon the reputation of the city and maybe even the campus. So the question is, what are you two going to do as president and vice president to sort of promote and change Toledo's reputation for the better?
Well, if I take this part, Anna? Okay, so I think a really good way to do this is to sort of start out by building off of the relations we already have with UTPD and then building relations with TPD. I think that when it comes to campus safety, I know for a fact that UTPD has told us that campus is the safest it's been in decades. So on the one hand, we need to promote that and just tell people that like there's been like almost no crime on campus at all over the past year and a half. That's amazing. On top of that, when it comes to the surrounding areas, if we start working with TPD, it would help build relations and it would allow us to sort of not necessarily say that we have that much sway over what TPD does. It allows us to sort of ask for like, hey, students don't feel safe for these parts. Is there anything you can do about it? And I know the chief of police is a big Rockets fan. He goes to games in the Glass Bowl. I think he'd be willing to at least hear us out. So those are sort of the steps we would take to make campus safer and the surrounding areas around campus safer.
I'd also like to divert to a very specific form of campus safety, and that has to do with sexual assault. So obviously that this is a huge issue. I know I personally have been sexually assaulted, and I at the time did not feel comfortable going through with a Title IX case. And a big part of that has to do with looking at the rates of Title IX cases that have successfully come to an outcome where the victim feels that they have received the accommodations that they need to continue their learning, and the perpetrator has actually been found responsible. And I think a big issue with that is that students don't necessarily understand the Title IX process. I know I really didn't, so they're terrified of it. So I think something that we should really focus on is not only bringing education to what is sexual assault and how to not do it, because that is very important, but making sure that students are aware of their resources for if it does happen, both confidential resources on campus, such as this counseling center and the Department of Student Advocacy, but also the non-confidential resources that have the ability to help students as they move on and have to cope with the stress and the trauma from sexual assault cases. So something that I'm hoping that we'll continue to work on for student government is improving our relations with the Title IX office and improving the situation for victims of sexual assault so that they feel more comfortable coming forward and having it addressed by the Title IX office.
Piggybacking off of that, I know we're probably going a little bit in depth in this, but I know that there are just 2 people working at the Title IX office right now, and one of the goals that we have is to work with administrators on expanding the office as well, because it's a lot to deal with if you just have 2 people for a campus of roughly 18,000 people, handle all those Title IX cases. So maybe advocating for more staffers would be a good approach to that.
Okay, thank you both. And actually, this brings us to sort of the theme of our next question, sexual assault on campus. As we know, this is an issue that is not unique to Toledo, but there have been several complaints of sexual assault, specifically in the RHA sort of environment. So what will you do to increase awareness between sort of resident assistants and residents in the on-campus housing? And what can you do for victims of sexual assault to keep them on track in their classes and make sure that their mental health is promoted and kept safe as they go about the Title IX process?
So I can kind of take this. So I was an RA in fall of 2019. So I did go through training and kind of understand what current training processes that Residence Life has for informing RAs of how to respond to situations where a resident comes forward and reports it, as well as the resources that we provide to our residents. And I think that sometimes those resources, while we do communicate them to our residents, we don't do enough to communicate them. I know that like I had a board posted in my hall at all times, like all the different confidential and unconfidential resources on campus. But I think sometimes having the larger conversation with your residents about just defining what sexual assault is and then like verbally explaining to them the difference between these resources so that they know which ones they can actually utilize. Because I know it's scary when you're actually going through it and you're like, oh my God, who's going to have to report this versus who isn't going to have to report it. So knowing that the counseling center is somewhere that you can go and you can talk to someone about it and you can learn how to cope with it without having to go through the Title IX process if you're not comfortable, but also making sure that students understand what the Title IX process is and understand what rights they have through that process. I think it'll allow victims to feel a little bit more comfortable to come forward. And I think that another big thing is communication within residence halls, that just because someone's your RA doesn't mean they're the person you have to go to. Understanding that you can go to your hall director, understanding you can go to a different RA if that's someone you're more comfortable with. I think that's super important because I know that like there were some people I would have never been comfortable talking to about it. But there were other people who I could, but I wasn't sure if I should bring them into it or not. So just encouraging residents to talk to whoever they're comfortable with and making sure that we continue to improve and build upon the current education processes that we have right now so that students understand resources, they understand the information that they have provided to them, and that it's provided to them in a way that they will retain, because that's the biggest thing is who's going to remember all these numbers and all these department names. Give them some way that they're actually able to remember it when the time comes, if the time comes.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Grant, question 17 goes to you. In light of the recent hazing tragedy in Bowling Green, what do you plan to do in order to work with or reform Greek life?
Yeah, that was unbelievably terrible. Really was a national tragedy. I think what we need to do in terms of Greek life is prioritize, let's think. When it comes to things like IFC and Panhel, building relations with the presidents of IFC and Panhel, I think is a good step in terms of once we have those connections, we can work with them as well as Alex, who is who's basically the head of Greek life at Toledo, and working with these people and encouraging them sort of define, make sure to be crystal clear with them. This is what hazing is. You cannot do it. And the consequences of you doing this will be that you get kicked off campus. I think it's very clear. You will also lose your house. I think if you define these things in a very clear and concise way, you tell them ahead of time, hey, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And there's no ambiguity at all. It's a really good way to discourage hazing, and I think it will, yes. All being said, I think hazing at Toledo, for the most part, is, compared to other universities, is not existent at all. Like, we are really, from my personal experience in Greek life, there's been no hazing whatsoever. So I think Toledo's Greek life is really good on prioritizing things beyond the traditional stereotypes of Greek life. Prioritize like Song Fest, Rockathon, these sort of, and charity events. I think, I know last semester and every semester I've been here at Toledo, I've gone to like at least 10 philanthropy events a semester. I think Toledo's Greek life has really prioritized the right things, which is another thing that would be a way to sort of steer away Toledo from hazing. So that's sort of what I on the issue.
Thank you, Grant. Anna, do you have anything to add?
I think Grant covered it well. I'm not a member of the Greek community, so I'm not very aware of the trainings and everything that they go through each year. So I think that Grant is a much better person to speak on these specific issues. Obviously, I do not condone hazing, but when it comes to personal experience within Toledo's Greek community, I don't have that experience, so I can't speak to it very well.
Okay, well, thank you both. That was our last question. So at this time, if there are any platform elements that you would like to cover this evening, or if there are any final messages you have for the students or faculty, now is the time to voice those.
I can go ahead and get us kicked off. Sorry, Grant, I saw you just jumping around. So I'm super excited for us to be able to get to work next year, and that work starts the minute that we're put into office. We're gonna, start building the Senate that we want to see, so that we can really get all of our projects kicked off and hit the ground running come August when everyone returns to school. I believe that we covered most of our campaign points, but again, the 5 things that we're really focusing on are improving the cohesive and collaborative culture between student organizations, improving parking, improving dining, improving the commuter experience, and improving the campus culture and spirit overall. I believe that we have a lot of great projects to get working on next year, and we're looking at some internal changes within student government to implement as well, so that we can have the strongest and most effective Senate to improve the student experience at the university.
Backing off of that, I think that we, over the last few years, as student government as a whole, have been building amazing relations with administrators and other student organizations. Our goal is to continue along that path, really sort of make student government the voice of the students and really empower as many students from all sorts of different backgrounds as possible. I think that's one of our top priorities, and that's sort of our overall vision.
Okay. Well, thank you both, and thank you to anyone who is watching this Q&A with Anna Walker and Grannt Epstein. Please remember to vote in the upcoming election, and go Rockets.